She was held captive for 19 years by her own father and gave birth to 9 children. She had been kidnapped at the young age of just 11 by her own stepfather. She was held captive for 19 years, and in that time, she gave birth to 9 children. From 1997 to 2016, there was no news of her until one day. Keep watching to know more about this true story. McGinnis grew up in Springfield, Missouri, in a house only a few blocks from the park where she played with her siblings and friends. Henri Michelle Pete had lived near the McGinnis in Springfield. McGinnis said her mother, Gayla, met Pete while distributing flyers that were part of an environmental group activity. She said the two quickly became friends and ended up getting married. Henri Michelle Pete kidnapped an 11-year-old girl named Rosalynn. He tricked her by pretending to marry her in the back of a van. Pete also forced her 15-year-old daughter to take on the roles of priest and witness. He married Rosalynn and even gave her a ring to make it look official. What makes this even more disturbing is that this unofficial marriage took place months before Rosalynn was kidnapped and only one day before Pete was supposed to marry Rosalynn's mother. Pete first started physically abusing Rosalynn at her home in Wagner, when she was only 10-11 years old. And at the same time, Rosalynn's mother was also abused by Pete. After many unsuccessful attempts to escape from their home, Rosalynn and her mother finally moved and found a women's sanctuary where they began to rebuild their new lives. Unfortunately, their new life was short-lived, as that year, Rosalynn was kidnapped from her new school in Pato and forced into the back of a van, with no hope of escape. Even though McGinnis' mother searched for her and spread the word through the media and child search ministries, no one could find McGinnis or Pete in the weeks that followed. McGinnis was 15 years old when she gave birth to her first child with Pete, a baby boy born in the back of the van. At that time, they lived in a shabby little mobile house with weathered floors and no utilities. McGinnis said she was forced to beg on the streets for food for her children because Pete spent all the money they raised on alcohol and substances. McGinnis said she tried to escape several times, but, when I was caught, the risk was much greater. Finally, at one point in time, it didn't affect me anymore, because I got used to it, she said. During the nearly 19 years she was kidnapped by her stepfather, McGinnis gave birth to 9 of Pete's children, and none of them know what their mother went through. To protect her children from the terrible reality and truth, Rosalynn kept her kidnapping and physical abuse a secret. She raised them and suffered the abuse and torture she had endured. She shot her several times, and she suffered several fractures. While in despair because, for nearly 2 decades, living in gloom, a new hope was rekindled. In 2016, after being kidnapped for 19 years from an Oklahoma school, McGinnis and her kids met a married couple in Mexico. The couple, Lisa and Ian, learned McGinnis used the name Stephanie, and Pete went by Bill. Lisa first met them at a supermarket where they couldn't afford groceries. Lisa and Ian helped them with money. The McGinnis kids rarely wore shoes and were shy. They were cautious about talking until they knew Lisa and Ian better because talking to strangers was forbidden. As Lisa and Ian became friends, Pete tried to distance the family by moving to an isolated village. Lisa and her husband tracked them down. They kept in touch until one visit made Lisa uneasy. Seeing the family's desperation, Lisa realized something was wrong. She called McGinnis, offering help if they could get Pete into rehab or jail for his addiction issues. The call ended when Pete returned home, and Lisa never spoke more about it. After a few weeks, when Pete passed out from drinking too much, McGinnis had her kids pack clothes and they ran away. By then, McGinnis and her 8 children had already left Mexico and returned to the United States. They took a taxi and went to find Lisa and Ian. However, the couple had moved to a new house. Luckily, McGinnis and Ian crossed paths while he was walking his dog. Lisa and Ian let the family stay in their home. McGinnis slowly started telling Lisa about all the terrible things she had been through. She said she was beaten or harassed every day. McGinnis also revealed that her name was not Stephanie, and Bill was not Pete's real name. She shared that her real name was Rosalynn McGinnis. To her surprise, Lisa searched Rosalynn McGinnis's name on Google, and a missing person posted her for McGinnis appeared. "I've been waiting all this time, and I have nothing to say." For the first person ever to notice that something was wrong and do something, and I'm very grateful, said McGinnis. Worried that Pete might find her and her child, McGinnis contacted the U.S. consulate in Oaxaca for help. After a few days, McGinnis and her kids got into the back of a fruit truck to travel for hours to the U.S. consulate. Unfortunately, things didn't go smoothly. When they arrived, the U.S. consulate couldn't assist them. In a panic, McGinnis called Lisa, who then reached out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, AMEC, in Washington, D.C. The organization found McGinnis still listed as missing and advised them to travel north by Bustano Gales, near the U.S.-Mexico border. McGinnis and her children made a long journey, flying through Tucson and Dallas to finally reunite with a long-lost family in Kansas City. After McGinnis and her kids escaped in 2016, life wasn't easy. They had very little money and were still getting used to life in the U.S., even simple things like food. What made it harder was knowing that Pete, who had hurt them, was still free. In September 2017, after McGinnis shared her story in People magazine, law enforcement arrested Pete when he tried to enter the U.S. He was sent back to Oklahoma and faced charges of kidnapping and planning intimate acts with a teenager. He got sentenced and had to pay a fine of $50,000 and over $50,000 in restitution to McGinnis. Luckily, McGinnis found support from J.C. Dugard, who went through a similar trauma. J.C. started the Jake Foundation to help people who've been through long-term abuse. McGinnis and her kids finally got their own house. "I want my kids to have a life I never had, including a house to live in," said McGinnis. Lisa and Ian, the couple who helped them, still stay in touch with the kids every week, talking about their days and future plans.